we look at years of potential life loss, people that have experienced adverse childhood experiences often lose 20 years of their life. And so from a public health perspective, in my opinion, if it was anything else other than a taboo topic of the adverse childhood experiences that people have, where we would be discussing this illness that takes 20 years off of people's lives, it would probably be more on the forefront of the discussions that we have as public health professionals. And so I seek to give awareness to this because when I do express my story or I do tell what I live with, there's so many women, especially that I have met, because we have more cyclical hormonal influences as women. And so when I often tell my story, there's many women that say, I have also experienced childhood trauma and I live with PCOS, or I live with a different hormonal disorder that's chronic and long lasting, or any other chronic long-term disorder that's influenced by hormonal challenges. And so I think that even though it is an uncomfortable conversation, I seek to give voice to this because I think it's something that we need to talk about.
Welcome to Public Health Careers. I'm your host, Omari Richards, founder of the Public Health Millennial. We're going to dive deep into public health topics and career journeys. You'll hear diverse career stories, absorb professional development and career strategies, get tips, while also learning from others to help you in your own journey and learning of public health. Learn about the vast world of public health careers, or just hear public health stories. Stay tuned so we can do our part towards a culture of health, well-being, and equity for all.
Hey friends, welcome to Public Health Careers. In today's episode, you'll hear more about complex PTSD and chronic illness from a public health perspective, adverse childhood experiences or ACEs, and why we need to have upstream focuses around ACEs, as well as why we should be making prevention sexy and deal with issues at the systems level and interventions at a youth level, as well as population level. Content warning, we do talk a little bit about suicide and ACEs, so just letting you all know that. But if you enjoyed the show or want to hear more public health careers, be sure to hit that subscribe button. You can stay up to date with this great content. Leave a review, let us know how we're doing. Greatly appreciate that, as well as share it with someone who will get some value with it. Those are the two ways you can really support the show and really helps and support me as a creator in this. So leave a review, share with a friend. It helps the show get out to more people and helps other people as I share it. And lastly, if you'd like to support the show, you can become a one-time contributor or a monthly contributor. Just go to the link below and click that and check it out if you're interested. Greatly appreciate my monthly contributors. So thank you all and enjoy the episode. Peace.
Hi, this is Taylor Rich. I am Director of STEM and Leadership at nonprofit organization Girls Inc of Worcester, and you are listening to Public Health Careers.
Today, we have a leader in program implementation and evaluation, specifically around programs of child health equity and employment equity in youth-saving organizations. She conferred an Associate of Science in Health Sciences at Fisher College, then a Bachelor's in Counseling Psychology at Bay Path University, followed by her Master of Public Health at Bay Path University. She currently works as Director of STEM and Leadership at Girls Inc of Worcester and is pursuing her Doctor of Health Sciences and Public Health at Bay Path University. We have Taylor Rich, MPH, LADC-I, CCHW. Welcome to the show. Yeah, so I'm glad to have you on the show today. So tell us, how do you identify, Taylor?
I identify using the she series of pronouns. I am a white woman, and I also identify as someone who lives with complex PTSD and a chronic autoimmune disorder.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I guess before we jump into any of that, like, can you talk a little bit more about that chronic disorder and complex PTSD? Or did I say that incorrectly? Chronic PTSD and sorry.
Same thing. They're both chronic
Okay.
and complex, right? I think so. So I live with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is a chronic autoimmune disorder of the thyroid. It's also known as hypothyroidism, and I'm also an individual that lives with complex PTSD, particularly from childhood trauma. And studies have shown that there is a linkage between complex PTSD or other adverse childhood experiences that result in complex PTSD and any autoimmune hormonal disorders, such as the one that I have.
Well, that is fascinating. And I'm sorry that you have to live with that, but thank you for coming on the show and sharing that. And I hope that like your story and everything that went into it is something that people suffering with similar issues can find inspiration in and learn from and persevere through. And to that vein, like I know that, as you said, like you wanted to raise more awareness around PTSD and chronic illnesses from a public health perspective. So, can you like speak more about the importance of raising awareness for complex PTSD and other chronic illnesses from a public health perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I am a really big fangirl of the work of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. And Adverse Childhood Experiences was a study that was over a pretty significant period of time done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. And it was a study that looked at how many adverse childhood experiences one individual had experienced, whether that was living in a home that someone was incarcerated, living with a parental figure or guardian that had chronic mental health disorders or substance use disorders, or both. Somebody that had a single parent home, somebody that lived in poverty. And from the perspective of public health, a lot of children identify with one or a lot of those adverse childhood experiences. And further along, the work of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris has found that it is an uncomfortable conversation to have with many people because it targets the experiences that we have as children. And particularly, we want to think that those would be good, but the sad fact is that some of them are not. And from a public health perspective, we often talk about years of potential life loss. So that is, if this one instance didn't happen, how many years would this person live? That could be from exposure to an infectious disease. That could be from an environmental influence. That could be from a genetic influence. That could be because of poverty, racism, any other socioeconomic or social determinant of health. And so when we look at years of potential life loss, people that have experienced adverse childhood experiences often lose 20 years of their life. And so from a public health perspective, in my opinion, if it was anything else other than a taboo topic of the adverse childhood experiences that people have, where we would be discussing something, this illness that takes 20 years off of people's lives, it would probably be more on the forefront of the discussions that we have as public health professionals. And so I seek to give awareness to this because when I do express my story or I do tell what I live with, there's so many women, especially that I have met, because we have more cyclical hormonal influences as women. And so when I often tell my story, there's many women that say, I have also experienced childhood trauma and I live with PCOS, or I live with a different hormonal disorder that's chronic and long lasting, or any other chronic long-term disorder that's influenced by hormonal challenges. And so I think that even though it is an uncomfortable conversation, I seek to give voice to this because I think it's something that we need to talk about. And I think we need to look at the preventative influences of nonprofit organizations or school systems and any other after school or child caring organizations as protective factors against this. When we look at even suicide for young people, there's research that suggests if they have one person that they can trust in their life, their rate of suicide decreases. And so in my opinion, you can look at any youth serving organization as like a giant public health prevention institution on from the perspective of childhood prevention. And with children, they're the perfect age to get prevention started because they're 100% our future. And for me, that's why I love what I do, because working in this environment, I do see the positive influences that outside after school programs can have for children.
Absolutely. I appreciate that a lot. And that was exactly what I was going to say, because a lot of the work that I do with my organization that I work with full time outside of the Public Health Millennial is around like ACEs, and a lot of the research, as you said, points to having someone that the children feel, or like people feel cared about, and like having that kind of community or mentorship is just so important to like those protective factors that lead to better outcomes. And it's crazy for you to say that like ACEs and that impact can have the devastating impact of 20 years loss of life. And just like thinking about not only like the loss of life, like what is the quality of life that you're living because of these situations. And I'm glad that you're also pointing to like solutions in the work that you're doing. It's like we already have these organizations that are working with these young people, so how do we create organizations that are like trauma informed and supporting these youth to really incorporate whatever principles are needed so that they can thrive and they don't have to go forward in with like the stresses in life that come with other health outcomes in life as well. Yo, are you looking for an online community to connect with like-minded health-focused people? Join my free community health and wellness Discord server at thephmillennial.com/join. You'll find growth-focused people talking about important community and personal health topics, networking opportunities, online yoga, book clubs, and more. Be sure to introduce yourself when you join. Link is in the description. Now really, back to the show. And if you don't mind sharing, would you like to share more about the experience of you being in rooms with women? You said, I think you spoke about cyclical hormonal influences are more common in women, and like how those conversations or you being in that room has really shaped you as being like an advocate for this type of work.
Sure. I think particularly for women leadership, oftentimes women are subjected to imitating the way that others rule and not just being natural in their own leadership skills. So for me, stepping out of that box and saying, this is what I have experienced, this is what I live with every day. There's been a lot of empowerment surrounding storytelling for women, especially, I think. And so and it's healing to listen to other people's stories after you share, right? Like, wow, you have experienced this. I have experienced something similar as well. And there's a lot of research that suggests that there's not enough research on women. And typically men or those who identify not those who identify. Let me back up for a second because I don't want to say the wrong thing. Those who identify as having a menstrual cycle experience hormonal changes differently than those who don't. And those who don't experience those hormonal changes are usually research is conducted upon because it costs less. Because if I research someone who doesn't have a menstrual cycle, every day of the month, they could essentially have the same hormonal balance. If I research someone that has a menstrual cycle that's not, that can fluctuate. And so that costs money. And we all know research tries to save as much money as they can. And so for me, sharing that experience, I've had many women that discuss endometriosis, PCOS, like I said, thyroid disorders. Thyroid disorders are more common in people who menstruate. And so in discussing the storytelling and also hearing other women that have complex PTSD from childhood or other traumas and also chronic hormonal disorders feels very validating and also makes you feel seen because it makes you feel there's a piece of that story that you can resonate with. And the more that we talk about it, the more that, as you mentioned, even if someone loses those 20 years of life, what is the quality of life leading up to that? Which is another public health statistic that I really like to focus on, is because even if this person outlives 20 more years, are they having a miserable 20 years the rest of their time here? And so for me, I believe that storytelling is very therapeutic. I am a person who loves any healing modality. And I don't really ever believe that we're truly healed, but it does make your quality of life improve significantly so that even if you have lost some life because of what has happened, you can still live your life sort of in this space of healing and feeling vindicated from what you've have had to endure.
Love that. And I think just the point around like storytelling and being in rooms where people are having similar situations, because many times you're growing up in a place where you don't know like this is happening to other people, or you feel like you're isolated, and that in itself can create its own issues. And being able to share space with people who are dealing with the same types of issues, and being able to share those stories can be really empowering, and can just say that like I'm not alone, and like we need to step up together to do this. And I'm glad that you also mentioned the other point of the disparities in medical research, or just research in general. Well, yeah, medical research, I would say, just because of the fact that it is more convenient, quote unquote, here for men to be the people that are research. But then that comes with a whole host of implications when women who have not been part of the research are using the same drugs that they think are efficacious in women, but they're not. Or not to the same extent, or whatever the case might be. So I think just like raising up that point of having um, women or people that menstruate as part of research is important. And so I'm glad that you mentioned those 2 points. Anyway, okay, let's get more into your story. So before we get more into your story and how you got into public health, was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking of one thing that I want to add.
Please.
And the linkage between complex PTSD and chronic hormonal disorders is because of the constant fight or flight that your body is experiencing when you are in situations where there are adverse childhood experiences occurring. So there's a whole host of hormonal imbalances that occur when your body is in a heightened state due to like increased cortisol. And as, like I said, I love Dr. Nadine Burke Harris's work. And she says, you know, these adaptations that we have for our hormones in fight or flight are really advantageous when we are in the woods escaping a bear. Right. Our heart starts pumping, our blood starts going, we get a little flushed, and we're off and running. And we escape the bear, and then our balances come down, and it's like, okay, here we are. I'm safe. My body did what it needed to do. But the thing is if the bear comes home every night, that's where we end up having chronic hormonal disorders because of the impact that those instances have over a period of time. And this isn't just from, child abuse or neglect, although it is like a significant piece, but this could also be from children living in a war zone, individuals that experience racism on a daily basis, individuals that live in poverty and don't know where their next meal is coming from, individuals that live in urban areas where it's not safe sometimes to walk home at night and things like that. So it's not just my story that is unique in that essence. And also I have to acknowledge that as a white woman, I don't experience that racism on a daily basis in those ways. And so I think there also has to be more research that's conducted on the effects of racial trauma for people that experience this heightened sense of fight or flight just because of the way that they walk outside and the color of their skin, and how white privilege and white supremacy has influenced our society in the United States.
Firstly, I appreciate that analogy. I think it makes a lot of sense and kind of like just simplifies what is happening, like both like ancestrally and like what's happening now, and like how that can lead to these causes. And yes, definitely appreciate you also acknowledging the fact that you are a white female in this space, and that does come with privileges, but it also doesn't like say that you can't suffer from these things as well. And I think like as we learn more about like epigenetics and just how important that is to just life, and what living as a black person, black male, black female, what that does for your cortisol levels, and what that does for, as you said, your fight or flight signals just being on all the time. And we don't truly understand the extent to what effect that has on all our health outcomes. So yeah, I appreciate you there, and would love if you shared some of like the formative work from Dr. Nadine Burke Harris that kind of like maybe spark this interest for you, or whatever the case might be. And I'll link those in the show notes for people to read on if they are interested.
Sure, yeah, and I love your calling into epigenetics, because that's another aspect of public health that I am very passionate about, because we don't know the influence of systemic oppression, and how that has influenced over time genetics. And that it just goes for even trauma. Like, I know we look at trauma as sort of a subdomain of social determinants of health, but I think it needs a larger space, because and I believe that any social determinant could essentially cause trauma and then influence epigenetics in a way of what is the effects of poverty, what is the effects of your zip code, and how your zip code influences how many years you live on this earth. Or if you're, just individuals that are born speaking a different language than English, and just that access to, barriers of care in that way, how does that constant fight or flight influence the epigenetics of future generations? And so the work of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, when I first had watched her, it was in one of my classes where we were discussing, it was for my undergrad. And I had my undergrad in counseling because I wanted to learn more about psychology and how the brain works, and how healing works sort of on like a neurological level in your brain. And so getting my degree in counseling psychology was sort of like the spark to all of this, and also like the spark to my healing, because I love learning, and it's a big piece of my identity, I think. And it's a big piece of what has also helped me heal, was being educated and also taking the stigma out of certain things that have happened in my life. And so when I was studying, we had talked about counseling, and somebody had brought up adverse childhood experiences, and the high correlation between also people who experience adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and people who live with chronic substance use disorders. And so I also have my license as an alcohol drug counselor for that purpose. That was another aspect of education that I wanted to get, that I wanted to learn more about. And we looked at the first TED Talk that I had ever seen from Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and it elaborated more on the ACEs, because we had just read through the physical hard copy research of the first study that was done way back when by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. And she speaks about how she read it, and I had a similar reaction to it. Like, sort of this wave came over me, and I thought, this just makes so much sense. This is it. Like, if people are losing years of their life from childhood trauma or any other adverse childhood experiences, why would we not be talking more about this? Because this is something that we can certainly try and prevent, right? We have, a lot of states have child welfare laws, and the empowerment against child abuse and neglect. So when I had watched her video, I just felt really also seen myself, because we had went around the class and we had discussed the score that we all got, and I had completed my score, and it was really high. Which is not, this is not a good high score to have, right? Like, other times when you're taking a test, you're like, I got the highest score. It's like, yeah, I got the highest score. I have the most trauma. And I had a classmate that said, wow, you don't, like, I wouldn't think that of you. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, what is everyone's frame of reference of adverse childhood experiences? Like, it's not a one size fits all, or there's not one demographic that experiences it. It's anyone. It can happen to anyone. And so after that, I had started to look into her work more, and her prevention factors. And it was from her and seeing her, like, how she had used her clinical, because she's a physician, but she started to focus more on that as a public health aspect and initiative. And I sort of then, that sort of sparked my interest in public health, because I'm like, I can sit here with a client and speak with them all I want about deep breathing and recovery models and stuff like that. But if someone doesn't have a place to live, of course they're going to want to, continue to fall into their addiction. That's not their problem or their fault if they don't have a place to live. Sort of yeah, of course, it would soften the blow for you to indulge in your substances if you're going to be sleeping under a slide in a park. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so in that aspect, I sort of credit her to sparking this passion of mine into public health, and looking at the other factors around what an individual that's coming into a space carries with them, whether that's their childhood trauma, whether that's where they live, the language that they speak, what they look like, how they practice their spirituality or religion. And if any of those are not what society or quote unquote the culture of white supremacy and capitalism deems as good, then you're going to run into problems. And that's not anyone's fault but the system. And so that's sort of where I fell into the aspect of public health and empowerment initiatives and creating more equity in this world for people.
That's important. I like the highlight of the point that you presenting as a white woman and then the classmates saying, oh, like I didn't realize that. And then to that point of you understanding that it's not only just like trauma and like well, not trauma in the sense of like being physically abused, but it could be something as not as simple, but like divorce is one of something that's counted as an ACE. So there's all these other factors. And I think like that's why it's important, especially in public health, is like not to come in judging people, is because you don't know, they can look one way, but you don't know what their life experiences have been up to that point. And I think like to your point of like everything you say in there, it's, you know, why aren't we focusing on the root cause here, the upstream cause of all these ACEs? Why are we waiting for the ACEs to develop into these chronic conditions or these poor health outcomes before we say let's try to work backwards now, which is where the system is. And I think like in this and in you sharing this is like, let's make prevention sexy and let's do that work.
Yes. Right. Let's oh my God, please, we need it. Right. Like I think, you know, and the other thing is that like I've seen a lot of like performative equity now in spaces where it's like we're doing equity and like we're this, we're that. And I'm sort of in the back like, public health professionals already know that, like you're not telling us anything that we don't know. You know, like look at the upstream. Right. Who's, you know, and the other thing that you jogged my memory on, which I wanted to just mention, was the highest correlation of ACEs, where you see one instance that has influence over future chronic health disorders, and not just hormonal, but this could be anything. This could be heart disease, any like medical, is experiencing domestic violence in the home or intimate partner violence. And statistically, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men experience that at least one time in their life. So if 25% of the male population and about 33.33% of the female identifying population experience this instance at least one of their life in their life, and any of these scenarios children are present, well, doesn't that say a lot about anyone that would have just even that in their ACE score? And I think we also need to look at that as another aspect of prevention that's quote unquote like literally the opposite of unsexy, right? Intimate partner violence and domestic violence. But there's other research, which is why I also love what I do at Girls Inc, which is a girl serving organization, or those who identify as such, that teaching healthy sexuality and healthy relationship, and, you know, love is respect. You think like these things that occur and they're so like all the time, right? Like having one class and teaching about healthy sexuality or teaching about responsible and respectful relationships, it might not be considered public health at the time, or people might not think of that in that way. But if you look at how that downstream effect is, right? Like we talk about the upstream effect. If that individual doesn't engage in a relationship such as that throughout their lifetime, or sees the warning signs and gets out of it and doesn't have somebody else who's a young person that's in that space, then we've already prevented an ACE that has the highest correlation to medical problems down the line. And so it's really like creating a healthier future generation just through these little tiny program implementations that we see at youth serving organizations. And I don't think that youth serving organizations get enough credit in that aspect of like how they prevent things down the line that could actually really be huge problems that have increased disease burden on our communities.
Exactly. And then, yes, I I definitely agree with everything everything you're saying there, and I think that that's important to think about. And like just the fact of you saying like the intimate partner violence statistics, and then thinking about how that affects ACEs, and then thinking about how ACEs affects our health outcomes. It's important for us to think upstream and figure out, okay, how can we prevent these things? And I love the point about sexuality education, because I had a PhD student come on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about sexuality education and around like communication, and like not just like STIs, but how are we teaching healthy communication, and how to create spaces, because like as you said, a lot of people might be growing up in households where they don't have models where it's healthy communication, and then if they don't know ways to learn about this, then they're just going to repeat a lot of the same traumas and behaviors. But anyway, we could talk about this for a long time, and maybe I'll bring you back on just to talk about ACEs and
Okay.
how that, yeah. But okay, let's get more into your public health story.
Gotcha.
So before we get into your public health story, what does public health mean to you?
Public health to me is the fundamental right that everyone is born to live the happiest, healthiest life that they possibly could. I think public health is everywhere. I think it's also on a macro and a micro level that some people don't even realize or acknowledge what's going on. And I often think of public health professionals as like the puppets or the man behind the mirror, where like there's these initiatives that are going on, or we're silently working in all different sectors of the world, but we all have this collective idea that the upstream approach is the best approach, and what we can do in our small little area of expertise in our sector really can influence the largest number of people that you possibly can. And the other reason why I got into public health was because, I love numbers and stuff in that way. And, it's the way to catch the most people. Like if I create this initiative and it helps save this whole community from, I don't know, an environmental influence, or like if I create this community initiative where we have cleaner air, well, I've just helped alleviate asthma or other symptoms for a whole community of people. You can never really do that in any other sense. And which is why I also love just reading. I'm not really into policy. I don't do it myself per se, but I love learning about it and reading about it. I'll be at the meetings voting for it, but I'm not the one that's writing them. So that's, I guess that's what public health means to me.
Yeah, love it. And I think that upstream focus and it being in so many things that we don't think about, and just how important it is. And I think to your earlier point, it's hard to quantify what those upstream roots solutions, like the youth saving organizations working with youth around resilience, it's hard to quantify like what that means in a population sense. And I think like once we get more clearer on that, maybe it will be easier to make that case to those politicians and other people that are doing this work that we need to invest into this, because it's going to give us the best ROI, return on investment of the money, as well as like better health outcomes, which leads to better economic outcomes, which is all intertwined in a lot of different ways. Yeah. Okay. So you got your bachelor's in counseling psychology at Baypath University, and you spoke a little bit about that. But before you got your bachelor's, you got your associates of science in health sciences at Fisher College. Do you want to talk a little bit about the thought process of like going into the associates of science program and then going into your bachelor's program? What was that thought process?
Sure. So it took me a while to complete my undergrad because I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do, and I was sort of fishing around. But the reason why I had gotten my associates in health sciences was because I love healthcare and science. And I am like such a science nerd at heart. And so I was like, well, let me go into health sciences. I'm not really sure exactly, but I'll just sort of get my gen eds out of the way. And so I took like a heavy science, a heavy science course load for my first 2 years, which is when I graduated with my associates in health sciences. And a lot of people had suggested, oh, you can go into nursing, or you can go into therapy, or you can go into any other allied health fields, things of that nature. And I wasn't really sure exactly what focus point I wanted to focus on. And I guess looking back now, it was because I was always supposed to develop into public health, because I don't really have one specific thing in healthcare that I'm like, I want to focus on just this. I love the aspect of all of public health, whether that's prevention, whether that's program evaluations, program implementation, the study of epidemiology, the study of epigenetics, the study of initiatives, or any other aspects of social justice that bring peace to people that are experiencing public health problems due to the way that the system is set up. And so I think for me, looking back, that was where I sort of started in my journey of public health.
Yeah, love that. And was it also during you said it's during your bachelor's that you ran into Dr. Nadine Harris and the work around ACEs, and then that also, like, because many people going into it, and maybe because you did a health associates of science in health sciences, you knew the word for public health. But when did like the word for public health and wanting to do more public health would come up? Was that just because of Dr. Nadine Harris?
Well, yeah, it's a lot of it is that one instance where I'm like, I'm a very spiritual person. So when the universe speaks, I listen. And so when I feel those goosebumps and I feel those chills, when I'm right where I need to be, and I'm doing what I'm put here to do. And I remember watching her TED Talk, and I was like floored. And I immediately went to Amazon and I got her book, The Deepest Well. And I was like, I got to read this ASAP. This is what it is. And I remember looking at the acronyms after her name, and I thought, well, I know what an MD is, but what is an MPH? And I was already in the process of finishing my bachelor's degree. And I don't know, also the algorithm universe showed me that Bay Path University also had a master's in public health. And I was like, here is the pandemic. And it was 2020. So I thought, you know what? I don't know how long this thing is going to last. Talk about, right? Here I am at the precipice of a public health crisis and the pandemic. And I was like, it might be a good time to go into this sector. And also, this is what I want to do. So let me just see. And it was wonderful. The pandemic gave me so much content to write. I could have gotten a whole degree just writing about what was going on at the pandemic that time. Because for public health professionals, it was like, probably hopefully once in a lifetime career of seeing a pandemic in our lifetime. And how that's also another aspect was like, when the pandemic happened, that highlighted how important public health professionals are. Like, I think it was really all of these people who have been doing this work sort of behind the scenes, getting their time to shine, unfortunately, but also, everybody says public health now is probably the place where we should put our money and have the most investments, right? And I think going through the pandemic and experiencing that was sort of like the sign that I was like, I need to keep going into this because this is what I really want to do.
Love it. And I'm glad that it took you from wanting to learn more about like counseling psychology and then learning more about public health and all these like root issues, and that we can deal with these things not at an individual but population health level. So during your bachelor's program, you were a suicide preventionist through QPR Institute. So talk about that experience and what you learned from it.
Yeah, sure. I still do trainings like on the side when people reach out to me, because I'm listed on the website as a trainer. Before I went to undergrad, I actually had lost a childhood friend to suicide. And again, another thing that we were discussing that's highly stigmatized. And so I went to a training that was funded by the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts. And I will say that's one thing that I'm very grateful for, is living in Massachusetts with how progressive our public health system is. So there's so many initiatives and so much funding that goes into suicide prevention, mental health prevention, and other substance use disorder prevention programs. And I've had several jobs that have been funded by grants and initiatives through Mass DPH. So I had found this training online. It was called QPR, and I went, and it was to be a QPR trainer through the Department of Public Health. And QPR is a wonderful framework because it's non-clinical. So it means anybody who is anyone can do it, as long as you remember the acronym, which is question, persuade, refer. So it's sort of just like CPR for a medical crisis. QPR is for a suicide crisis. So questioning someone, have you thought about taking your own life, or have you thought about killing yourself? And then waiting for the response of either yes or no. And if it's yes, persuading that person to go get help in the way of like, do you want me to come with you to the hospital? Or what are some things that we can do right now to make you feel better? Or have you thought about the other protective factors that you have in your life? Whether it's people, pets, work, other community members that care about you, and then referring them to that place, whether it's a session with their therapist, going to an emergency room with them, or referring them to another alternative form of care. And the beauty of QPR is that once it's learned by anyone can do it. And it also makes you feel comfortable enough to ask that question of, have you thought about taking your own life, or have you thought about killing yourself? Because that's a very difficult thing for many people to come to terms with because of maybe their upbringing and religious beliefs, or also just the stigma that has been surrounded between suicide. Even just learning the verbiage of not using the word commit. And that's another aspect of QPR that we discuss, is using the word commit. It implies that someone is either committing a sin or committing a crime. And suicide is neither one of those. It's just feeling hopeless and wanting to take your own life. So conducting education around the verbiage that we can use for people, that they feel supported and empowered to also make their own decisions of getting help. And so I've done several trainings, especially with law enforcement, because of their high suicidality rate. And yeah, just also with students, bringing that awareness to them too. The CDC had published a teen risk outcome survey, which was over the pandemic. It was 2020 to 2021. And so I think people were shocked that was the outcome. The high rate of suicidal intentions, suicide ideation. That was it. The CDC had come out with the teen risk surveillance data from 2020 to 2021. And many people were shocked at the high rates of suicidal ideation. But as public health professionals and also people that have experienced suicide in their communities, it didn't surprise many people because of how isolating the pandemic was. And so I'm very grateful to the experience that I've had with training people. And again, it's another mini initiative that I've felt I've given back to my community by helping people feel more comfortable talking about suicide.
Yeah, language is important, and having conversations about hard things are also very, very important. So thank you for doing that. And before we move on to like your Masters of Public Health and a little bit about that, what are some undergrad takeaways that you wanted to share, if any?
Undergrad takeaways for me, for counseling, but also focusing on the substance use aspect, is that substance use disorder is a disease. It should be treated and talked about as such. There's so many times where I hear stigmatizing language around people that struggle with substance use disorder. it's no different than living with any other chronic progressive lifelong illness. It's a battle every day to fight for your recovery. And I think that there's no right way to recover. What works for someone might not work for someone else. And we need to be more open to having conversations around methods and models of recovery. And also we need to then, again, look at the systemic influences that are causing someone to indulge in their substance use disorder, or maybe a root cause as to why they have created this environment for themselves that has led to substance use disorder. Like one of my favorite takeaways or quotes is that like trauma is the real gateway drug. And so experienced trauma, whether that's through loss of housing, nutrition that's poor, poverty in general is very traumatizing, and other influences that have taken over people's lives and caused them to experience trauma in a way that makes taking a drink or doing a drug alleviate some of that feeling of trauma.
Appreciate that, and like just appreciate you like lifting it up, and I think it's important, like we're having more conversations around these things as public health as a whole, and I think it's important that we continue the conversations and share this to just like lay people, the populations in general, so that they are able to understand like these impacts, as well as not having that kind of punitive look at people and say, oh, it's your fault because of this, or like pull you like that kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality, as opposed to like understanding that there are systems that have been set up that have led people to more likely be susceptible to these kinds of things, and the systems hold them in place so that they are continuing to have those health outcomes and to suffer the disproportionate rates of whether that's suicide, ideation, etc., etc. So yes, I'm glad that you mentioned that. So talking more about your MPH, you saw Dr. Nadine Harris, you saw that she had an MD, you saw that she had an MPH, you learned more about Masters of Public Health. Then the universe aligned and said, okay, you did your undergrad at Baypath University. Baypath University also has a Master of Public Health degree. So tell me more about that thought process, or was it just like an automatic, yes, I need to do this, as you went to get your Master's of Public Health at Baypath University?
Yeah. So for me too, the period of time, and I guess I should mention this too, the period of time between completing my associate's degree and graduating with my undergrad was 10 years. I would take a class here and there. I would think about what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to like go all in and get in debt if it wasn't something that I was really seriously passionate about, which I am seriously passionate about mental health and the recovery community and suicide prevention. So it was 2020. Again, I was like on the precipice of graduating. I think it was like a few months away. And, after that Google search, there was an open house, and this was right before the pandemic started. So people were still going in person. So it was like January of 2019. And I went to an open house, and I spoke with an advisor, and we sat down for a little bit. We talked about the classes, and I was just really interested in all of that work. And again, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris like sparked all of this for me, and thinking like, wow, these are all aspects that I could get a little bit of and then see where I want to focus on, because the graduate programs, the coursework was very varied. It was global health, advanced epidemiology and surveillance, global health, advanced epidemiology, program implementation and evaluation, my capstone and research project. So all of those things sort of just really correlated with what I wanted to focus on and wanted to learn more about. And so I met with my advisor, who's now my boss, because I'm the grad assistant for the doctoral program that I'm in now, which is also at Baypath. And so that's essentially how I fell into where I was going to finish my degree at. And I love the community that Baypath has. They're really focused on adult learners and access to learning through online. And I learn really well online because it's easy for me to look and do my independent reading. I don't want to sit in a lecture hall for 3 hours and take notes. Like, that's just not my style. And it's like, it's just not who I am. I don't learn well like that. So for me, being able to tap into this online adult learning community was really, really pivotal to my success.
And that's really important that you mentioned that, like leaning into what works for you, because not everyone is going to like online learning. Some people love online learning. So I think it's important that you identify what works for you, and you try to pursue opportunities where you're able to really fit that in, which I think is very important. So during your MPH program, you had a couple positions, at least a couple positions that I have written down here. So you were a social worker at the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families. You want to talk a little bit about that experience?
Sure. So when I had went into social work, it was sort of like a natural branch off of my undergrad, but also then I was thinking, well, some of the systems and the foundations that the Department of Children and Families, or we call it DCF in Massachusetts, like what that stands for, of the pillars, is like child welfare and prevention against abuse and neglect. But I realized that it was, again, on an individual basis and not necessarily a grand scale macro public health level prevention. And, you know, I think social workers in that space don't get enough credit because it's a very grueling job and it's really difficult. So I didn't last too long. It didn't, some of the alignments, and the methods of what they stand for, which is like child abuse prevention and child neglect prevention, I got behind. But the case management social work that I was like, that was my role, it didn't really align with what I wanted to do for my future. And I was still in the process of completing my MPH. So it wasn't a job that I wanted to see myself in post-grad.
Yeah, and that's important for people to realize. Like, I think taking on opportunities and just really learning like what is a good fit for you, and especially in social work, it is very tough because a lot of times you have to not only deal with the issues in your day-to-day life, but you have to listen and be there for people in a lot of ways and connect them to resources and different aspects to like help and support them, which can also be like trauma inducing, and in that in itself, like people need a lot of breaks from that, or it's like easy to get burnt out from that type of work. So I'm glad that you were able to experience it, but I'm also glad that you realize that there's an inherent lack in like just working with, like, I'm gonna say this because I don't want social workers to hate me. It is important for the individual aspect, and I think like that one-to-one is very important. But like to your point, it's like when we're trying to deal with root causes and solve like societal issues, having a population health lens is a lot more impactful and is a lot more helpful in preventing people from having to have those. Well, we want less social workers essentially is what we're trying to solve for in public health. Is like we're trying to create a society that doesn't need all of these supports, but we do provide these supports because we know that people need it in those cases. So I appreciate you sharing that. And during your MPH, you're also a public health program evaluator / grant writer at Living in Freedom Together, and you conducted a program evaluation on an employment equity pilot program called Brave, I think it was. So you're going to talk a little bit about that experience, and I know you might want to like just talk about how that formed into your current role as director of STEM and leadership at Girls Inc of Worcester.
Sure.
Worcester.
Worcester.
Sorry, everyone. Don't hate me, people.
Yeah, sure. So part of any usual MPH is completing a practicum and a capstone, which is essentially an internship and a research project. And so when I was seeking what I wanted to focus on, I was listening to my community and I was listening to missions and things that I really stood for. And one thing that I definitely stand for is women empowerment, but also women empowerment through employment equity. And there's a whole other method behind that also, is the prevention factors behind someone having a good employable job that brings you an income that makes you able to be independent. So we had discussed before we got into my career, we had discussed the aspect of intimate partner violence. And which I should have mentioned, but I am also someone that identifies as someone who has survived domestic violence. And so a big piece of my mission in my work is focusing on employment equity, because financial abuse is the number one cause of why people do not leave domestic and intimate partner violence. Is the number one cause of why people don't leave is financial abuse. Oftentimes we see there's sharing of finances, there's sharing of debt burden, there's sharing of a whole host of things that make people unable to leave because they can't afford to live by themselves. And again, that's also a system error. I think we need to do more work in the aspects of rent controlled apartments or other income based renting or home equity models. And so when I had completed my internship at Lyft, which is a program that is for survivors of commercial sex exploitation and sex trafficking. So it's a survivor-led organization, and they have so many different treatment modalities and housing initiatives. But the pilot program that they were focusing on was this program called BRAVE, and it stands for Building Real Action Through Viable Employment. And so it was a food truck that was for these individuals that were surviving commercial sex exploitation to learn skills like customer service, food safety, other soft skills for like peer-to-peer recovery support, and also the ability to earn a paycheck without exploiting your body. And so many of those participants in the program hadn't experienced that in a very long time. They were used to exploiting their body for income. And so this program was really a place for them to build employment equity. And another aspect of this that was really great was the city of Worcester had identified that if these individuals participated in this program, they would also receive a housing voucher, and they also earned an income. So there was all these factors that were working with this program as a real public health initiative to get these people to a stable place after experiencing commercial sex exploitation or sex trafficking. And I had went in, and one of my coursework that I found really, really revolutionary was program implementation and evaluation, because we can have all of these good ideas about what we should do for root causes, and the ways that we can implement those is through programs. And so what does a solid program look like? What's our return on investment? Who are the key stakeholders in this environment? And then what are the measurable objectives? Like, did these individuals experience an improvement in their quality of life? Did they experience a reduction in their mental health symptoms? Did they experience a reduction in their cravings or relapse prevention? And if they had identified as someone that was in substance use disorder recovery, and other factors that I had researched, which was like, did they feel more peer-to-peer support? Did they feel supported by somebody else that identified in their same way? And throughout that, I had also worked on some grants with writing into the program, which also helped me realize that funding is a huge part of any public health initiative. So I always say that I can't thank the people at Lyft enough for allowing me in that space and allowing me to learn all of those skills in that time. Like, I can't imagine that anywhere else I would have learned all of those skills in that short amount of time. And it really helped me realize that prevention methods and employment equity are so powerful for women. And there's also another, sorry, let me back up and think about that. The other aspect that we focused on was like the gender pay gap. And so working in that avenue also helped me realize that where I am currently in my position was sort of like kismet. I love science, and I think more women need to be in STEM in general, which is another aspect of my job. So women in STEM, there's a severe lack of that within the STEM industries and sector. And then when you add that to first generation students or students of color or English as a second language students, the access for them to that higher education or those STEM careers is very limited. And so in my current role, it's been easy for me to transition from my internship to this because it's a similar idea of implementing a program and then evaluating the aspects of the results afterwards, which is how many of my students go to college, how many of them are first generation, how many of them have experienced low income or come from low income families, and all of those aspects of how to get them more place in STEM. And so through that pilot employment equity program, I now am able to be the director of this employment equity program through STEM for women within my community. So it's really been amazing.
Sounds amazing. And I think it's really important, like, that you highlighted that you were able to gain so many skills and be able to do so much work in this one internship opportunity that really like shaped how you want to take forward your work, as well as like kind of just line that path for you to get this job as director of STEM and leadership in Girls Inc of Worcester. Okay, got that right this time. Perfect.
But yep, you got
it. and I think it's also important, as you said, like you're able to learn that these women that were in these situations not only needed one thing, but they needed to be thought about in this holistic approach and like taking all the different perspectives to get them all the support so that they can thrive in a meaningful way, as opposed to like just focusing on one of the aspects, whether that's like just employment, but okay, they have employment, but do they have housing? Do they have reliable transportation? Do they have healthcare? Do they have access to mental health supports? Like there's just so many things that come up. And I think you highlighted that in the work that you're able to do and like really showed that this is important work. And I think the other thing you highlighted in just women in STEM is that like when you look at women in STEM, there are disparities between them and men. And then when you look at the intersections of women, like women who are also Black in STEM, or women who speak a different language, or like English is not their first language, or women who are not from the America, they immigrated here, and just how those disparities are like just leveled, and just shows the intersectionality of public health and public health issues, and that we can't take like just one lens to look at them at this, because disparities are affected across all these different intersections of public health. And to your point that you made a lot earlier is that the social determinants of health have trauma, or they can't have traumatic experiences, like whether once you're not getting any of those social determinants of health met, whether that's food, transportation, healthcare, like they have trauma implications in them in that work. So I'm glad that you were able to highlight that. And as
sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead.
You go ahead, please.
I'm just thinking of one thing that I want to highlight too was the other reason why I love what I do is that STEM fields are generally one of the highest paying fields that we see. And so again, getting people that have historically been marginalized due to white supremacy and other aspects of the state of the United States and our history is especially important, because that's also a chance to break a cycle of poverty, which we know is traumatic. So getting women that are in STEM also able to have a high income paying job where they may not have come from a family that has generational wealth, coupled with also now this acts as another prevention factor for them to be financially independent and not subjected to be in a relationship that might be financially abusive, is another piece of the intersectionality of why I love what I do, and it's public health prevention factors of it.
Absolutely love that, and I'm glad that you are advocating or like working in this space, because like yes, all of that is very, very true. And I think that's one thing that we overlook a lot of times, just like poverty and how that plays into all the other aspects of our health, and just how important it is to have living wage jobs or high paying jobs. And to your point, a lot of people, especially Black people in these kind of situations, it's like they're not taking care of just themselves. It's usually they have to take care of themselves and then their parents or their siblings or all these other things that come with all those different traumatic experiences and social determinants of health and systems that they are placed into. So I'm glad that you're able to mention that. So as Director of STEM and Leadership at Girls Inc of Worcester, firstly, how did you get into this position? And then like, what do you do in this role?
Sure. So I got into it from just like being in the community and the position opening up. And it was sort of a natural progression from my previous work with my internship experience and all of that, and working in another nonprofit organization, which Lyft was. And Girls Inc of Worcester now, I direct the STEM and leadership program. So I have about 150 girls that are over a series of cohorts from ages 8th grade through 12th grade. And so we focus on getting them exposure to STEM, but also part of the other program curriculum and the implementation is focused on leadership and wellness, because there's other factors that happen regardless of if someone gets into STEM, where we want to educate young women on how to be successful in their future through leadership. So it could be things like financial literacy, healthy sexuality, sexual education, access to higher education, self-defense, warning signs for healthy relationships, blanking on what else, just so many things. And so the beauty of this program is that I have these girls for over a span of 5 years. So when they're in the program, they start in 8th grade and then they progress as they progress in their grades up to high school. And when they graduate high school, they graduate this program. So if you look at it from a public health perspective, 5 years and having 150 girls is like a large catchment of a population to have, and to be able to support for that long period of a time and prepare them for the world. And also just support them in any way that they need to in general. As I had mentioned earlier, like just being a young person and trusting an adult is a really big thing. If where you're coming from in your home environment or elsewhere, you don't feel that those needs are being met. And so we focus a lot too on nutrition and wellness, other healing modalities like self-care and wellness for them. Because I know when they leave these doors, the world can be really, really cruel and insidious. And so I want them to be prepared and just really, really live the best life that they can.
That's amazing. And I love the model of like not just doing this like for 1 year, but having cohorts that are 5 years long. Because I think like a lot can happen in 5 years and a lot of learning. And as you said, like those protective factors and those like coping mechanisms are important. And it's not something you can just like pick up one day, but just having that supportive environment where you're able to be seen and be heard and like just learn skills and learn skills that will be very applicable to you going forward and being successful in life and having better health outcomes, I think is very important. So thank you for that work that you do. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, so you're a current Doctor of Health Sciences student in public health at Bay Path University. Do you know, tell us a little bit about this thought process? And I also wanted to, like, before you answer that, I just wanted to say, like, I'm glad that you also mentioned earlier, and I forgot to say it, was that you took your time from your associate's degree into finishing your bachelor's degree. And I think that is something that we overlook too much in the society that we live in. But I think that's very important, especially when we're talking about debt and we're talking about poverty and we're talking about like what effect that has on people and what stresses that can have on someone. Just being like more intentional in following your path, as well as like just learning more about yourself so that you're not ending up in a career that doesn't serve you fully. Okay, now getting back to your Doctors of Health Sciences. So how did that all come up? Talk us through that.
Yeah. So I think it's really great that you highlighted too. Something I always try and share with my students is I don't think anyone knows what they want to do with their entire life at the age of 18.
Yeah,
And so to kind of ask students to say what they want to do for their future career at that age, when your brain isn't fully developed, to now they statistically look at around 24, it's kind of ludicrous to ask a child to make this lifelong decision and to sign on for hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. So my doctoral degree that I got involved in was because of my advisor for my master's of public health. And she had said, we have this program, it's Doctor of Health Sciences. There's 12 different tracks, but we do have a public health track if you're interested. And so again, the universe is really funny, because here I am. I started off with my Associates of Health Sciences, and now I'm getting my Doctor of Health Sciences. So in a roundabout way, I was always right where I needed to be. I just didn't know exactly quite yet. So my concentration is public health. And so I'm focusing on understanding policy work and initiatives, and looking through advanced surveillance methods for communities that serve the Worcester area.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that full circle moment is awesome, and meant like I would say, like, if you didn't have those experiences after that associates, who would even know that you would come back to say, like, health sciences is what I want to do, or like this is the kind of impact I want to have in society. So that's why it's like there's no wrong decisions. Well, there are definitely some wrong decisions in life, but a lot of times like
Yeah.
the choices that we make, there's no wrong decision in them, because it's just different directions to get to where we need to get to. And in saying that, like, you are where you need to get to and do the kind of work that you are passionate about, as well as have the impact that you'd like to make on a population level, which I think is very, very important. Is there anything, how long have you been in your Doctor of Health Sciences? Or that's a question. How did you choose a Doctor of Health Sciences over like PhD in public health or a DRPH? Was there any thought process around that, or was it like Doctor of Health Sciences, I'm sold?
Yeah, so I focused on Doctor of Health Sciences because it's more, there's more foundational coursework around leadership and programming versus like a PhD or that avenue, which is heavily based on research. I love reading research. I'm not like a fan of like the long process of conducting research. I give so much credit to public health researchers. I think it's also you need to know what you're good at, and what you like could be good at if you sort of studied and killed yourself, but also what works for you. And so for me, going through that doctorate program, it's now easier for me to see that this is what I love to do, but what I'm also good at is looking at programming, and also on a leadership administrative level of where my skills are with that. Many people that I am in the program with are going for healthcare administration, or they're focusing on clinical psychology for their doctoral concentration. So for me, it was natural because I wanted to learn more program leadership skills, but also still focus on a public health level, public health track, I would say.
Love that once again. And I think that's important for people to understand, that there are more than one way to get a doctorate in public health, and like really understanding why you're getting that doctorate, and like what are your strengths, or what are the things that you want to get more of. Because to your point, I love reading research as well, but like I'm not the one that wants to actually do a lot of that research. I'd rather be the person that's reading it and implementing the work, which I think is something that we don't talk enough about, or there isn't enough around in public health. So I'm glad that you're able to realize, like, I don't have to do this research. Yes, it's important, but there are other ways for me to impact these populations that I want to work with.
Yeah, and for me, like for my future students too, and my students now, to see, someone who's a little bit older, still continuing their education just because I'm passionate about it, and also being the first person in my family, but also the first woman in my family to gain a doctoral degree. And I like challenging myself with lifelong learning anyways. So for me, it was sort of, again, a natural progression into, I still want to go to school. And so it's been a really, really great experience working for Bay Path as a grad assistant, but also being a student there as well. I'm going for my third ring with them. So I don't know. Yeah. So it's funny. I'm always like, yeah, I'm going to be there for life. Like, you know.
Hopefully they put your portrait up on the wall somewhere.
Yeah, I was like, well, afterwards, I was like, you guys, now you have to hire me as a professor when I leave here. Like, I have the most experience being a student, so.
Love that.
Yeah.
And talking about being a lifelong learner, this might be a difficult question for you, but like, where would you like to see yourself in the future?
It's tough to say. I think for me, I will always be having, dipping my toes in a bunch of different pools. I think I'll be always attending trainings, always looking for a certification, because I just have a real thirst for understanding how the world works and how we can collaborate and make this place a better experience for people. Like, we only get this short amount of time, and it's not fair that other people experience it in the way that they do. And so I think also giving voice to the way that we can experience life through public health initiatives and have quality of life, like you mentioned, how to increase the quality of life of people while we're here is really the quintessential reason of why public health exists.
Absolutely. Love that. And I think like I appreciate when people don't like box themselves into anything when they answer this question, because I think that is the beauty of public health, is that the more that you learn, I guess the less that you know, as well as like just being directional in the work that you want to do kind of leads you to different opportunities and in getting to that. And I think like your story is a perfect example of that. It's like, let me get my counseling psychology degree, and then that led you into understanding more about ACEs, and then learning about public health, and then going into a master's of public health, and then from that learning about this internship and just learning about like equity in employment for women, and how this plays into all the other things around ACEs and social determinants of health, which kind of led you into your doctor of health sciences, which I think is awesome. So I'm glad that you're an example of like, you don't need to have a perfect like marker of what your life is going to be, but just understanding that if you find like a passion or work that is like really empowering to yourself, and that's making an impact on a population, like just continue to tread down that path, and you will see where you end up, because most of the times you'll end up where you need to be.
Yeah. And I will say too, the one thing that I try and instill in my students is, I mentioned earlier, like being 18 and having society think that you need to have everything figured out, is every experience that you have in this life, whether that's professional or personal or spiritual, it sort of preps you on these transferable skills. So I wouldn't have the confidence that I have to discuss these topics or speak with my students about really tough issues had it not been for my undergraduate in counseling. I'm not really essentially using it in that direct way where I'm conducting therapy, but I am able to create an environment where they feel psychologically safe with me because of the transferable skills that I have experienced through my psych degree.
Yeah, and I love that. Like, building on the different skills that you gain throughout your life is very important. And I think like taking whatever experience it might be, whether you like it or you don't like it, just learning what skills you can take from that to the next thing in life is something that's very, very important. And before I move you on to the Furious Five, is there anything else that you wanted to mention? Maybe something that we didn't talk about that you wanted to highlight, or are we good to move to the Furious Five?
I think we're good.
Okay, awesome. And I'll probably try to bring you back on to talk more about ACEs, because I think that conversation could have gone on and we could have spoken just about that for an hour and some.
Yeah.
So
well, did you say that's what you do too?
I work not only in ACEs, I do work around food systems, around active recreation, around grassroots capacity building, and substance misuse.
I love that. We're similar.
We're so similar. Love it.
I know. Look at our last names too, right? Like
I know.
I'm always like, whenever I see someone that's like Rich something, I usually see Richard, but like Richard's different. I like it.
Thank you. Okay, well, moving on to the Furious Five, Taylor. These are the 5 questions I ask all guests. Number 1, what advice would you give to a student trying to pursue a career in public health?
I would tell them to be open-minded about what public health is. I have many people that work in different capacities within the realm of public health. I remember some of my students that I was in class with, one of them was working on a clean water initiative in Tanzania from her home country. One was working in epidemiology within a lab. One was doing case management on NICU babies, and then I was in case management for people with substance use disorder. But we were all doing public health at the same time. So really, it's whatever you naturally develop and progress into as a public health professional, which is the beauty of public health. It's not one size fits all. And that's probably what I would tell them.
Love that. And to that point, like, public health is everything, and we can find ways to make that population impact in whatever sphere of public health you'd like to make that impact in. So thank you for that. So number 2, if you're talking to someone wanting to get into your position, what advice would you give them?
Probably to show up in every aspect as your authentic self. People often try and emulate different things that other people are doing, but I think showing up naturally as who you are with what you bring to the table can speak a lot for any position that you're going for. And also to look at the broader picture of, again, why people are in these situations. So when we look at a child that's experiencing maybe a difficult behavior, or there's something that has happened, we need to dig deeper as to why those are occurring. Are the parents stressed out because they're living paycheck to paycheck? Is their housing not in the best area, or it's at a higher rate of crime? Is there access to higher education that their parents haven't had the fortunate, opportunity and privilege to pursue? Or is there language barriers, cultural barriers? So I would say you need to, when you're in a position, especially in a youth serving organization, that child is a representation of the system, because we all live in the system. So no one is spared of the effects that it can have if it's working how it's supposed to. Unfortunately, to the detriment of others that have experienced this historical oppression and now are marginalized because of that.
Very profound, Taylor. Thank you. Number 3, what's something you're working on improving in your life right now?
Right now, I am working on my public speaking. So again, I have sought out opportunities such as this. And so I wanted to express my gratitude for you having me in this space, because growing up, I was so shy. I didn't have confidence. Like public speaking, I would break out in hives. Like doing a presentation in history class, I was like the worst. I got F's on all of my presentations and stuff, even though I definitely knew what I wanted to say. It's just been a really, really hard thing for me to do. And so as of right now, this is my 4th speaking engagement that I've had this year. So I'm like 1 a month, which is really great. And I'm working on building that confidence for me, because I think I have a lot to say. It's just been really hard for me to say it in the past, but now I'm finding my voice in storytelling and speaking on what I know and who I am.
I appreciate that vulnerability, and I think it highlights the importance of kind of stepping into things that make us kind of uncomfortable, and knowing that things aren't one or nothing. It's like we can learn as we go, and we can grow in different skill sets. So I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you sharing, and my pleasure for having you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Number 4, professionally, do you recommend anything?
Well, I think I've mentioned her enough, but the work of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris.
Right.
That also, so her book, which is called The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, focuses on ACEs. Also getting involved in your local nonprofits in general, I think, is a way that public health professionals, if they're working in certain capacities, can also show up, whether that's lending your voice or ear on a board or a committee, and just sharing that knowledge and your prevention perspective with your community is really powerful, because we have some people that still don't understand what an upstream approach is. And so I think we need to give more voice of that in spaces where there's limited amount of that being talked about. And as far as any other professional development, I would just say attending conferences that speak to you. Like I had attended the conference on Black maternal health at Tufts University through their Center for Black Maternal Health and Reproductive Justice. And the work of their director, Dr. A.O., is really inspiring. They're fighting for Black birthing people to have more equity and prevention and birth the way that they want to and not experience medical racism. So her work is really revolutionary, and she's very passionate. And she's also a public health expert. And she also has a lab that's conducting research on the outcomes of Black birthing people and prevention methods and public health initiatives to support equity.
Love that. And yes, I've had Dr. Amuta Anakuga on the podcast. I will link the episode in the show notes for anyone that's interested. But yeah, she's doing amazing work.
She is incredible. Oh my gosh, I was just so inspired. And that's again, like you as a professional too, like you have to seek out things that might not be in your realm, or open yourself up to different people that are doing really profound work in a different sector of public health that you're facing, or a different public health perspective that they're passionate about. Like there's another nonprofit that we have in the area called the Regional Environmental Council, and they focus on environmental justice and food security. And so they're public health experts in that sense of climate justice and environmental justice. So it's just also about opening yourself up professionally to develop and learn a little bit more about other people that are doing really, really great work too, that you can learn from.
Absolutely. And I think in those intersections and in those spaces, there's so much space for learning and for just translation of that work into the work that you are doing. So I appreciate you raising that up, Taylor. And then last but not least, where can people connect with you, Taylor?
LinkedIn. I always have my LinkedIn. I'm always on it. It's like my new professional Facebook.
Right.
So that way, you can always find me here at Girls Inc of Worcester. And then I also am the grad assistant at Bay Path University. So if you're ever connecting that way with any of the health science doctoral programs, I'm there too. And I'm always open to helping people develop their career, or just speaking more about other public health initiatives in the area. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and being vulnerable about it. Definitely think we could have talked about ACEs and trauma for the entire hour and a half that we've been chatting, but I'm glad that we got to cover some of your story, and I will definitely try to bring you back to talk more about that in some respects. So I will be in contact around that, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing, Taylor.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Housekeeping items, everyone. Thank you all so much for listening or watching this episode. Greatly appreciate it. If you've gotten this far, be sure to subscribe. Be sure to leave a like if you're watching it on YouTube. Leave a review and share it with a friend. That's how the show gets out to more people, and it definitely helps other people just learn about what they can do in public health. So I appreciate you. Peace.